Good evening. I'm John Batchelor, and at 9 o'clock tonight, I will say this is the John Batchelor Show. So in this particular instance, it's a pleasure to speak to you all and your lovely faces on a beautiful, beautiful winter night in New York City. My show is in New York on WABC, a talk station. I have been on the air daily since the attack. And for those of you who have not heard my show or have heard of it and puzzled, I begin with a quick recitation. September 8th, 2001, Saturday night, I was doing what was at the time called long-form radio on WABC, a hobby show. I'd been invited that year by the program director with a colleague of mine, Paul Alexander, to come in each weekend and do 4 hours on Saturday night. Not a crisis night, a night when people listen and enjoy stories. The story we were telling on Saturday night, September 8th, was about an attack that had happened October of 2000, right at the end of Mr. Clinton's administration. October 12th, in the port of Aden, in a strange country called Yemen. It's hard to imagine that 12 years ago we didn't know where Yemen was, we'd never heard of Aden, and we didn't know why somebody drove a motorcraft into the side of one of our best warships, killed 17 of our sailors in blowing themselves up. It was a mystery. So we spent 4 hours that night talking with people who understood what had happened in Aden. Counterterrorism experts, which was an odd name to me at the time. I'd never met it on the radio. We also talked, the first guest that evening, to Admiral Nader, who had commanded the 2nd and 5th Fleet the night of the attack. And he came on and he told stories about how he was learning to be patient with the FBI investigation of the men who had done this to our warship and our sailors. And he'd just been over to the FBI headquarters that week, the week before, he told me that night. I remember it vividly because it was all so eerie that we had this conversation. And he said, they told me the investigation is proceeding, that nothing is being spared. They will find the men who did this. From an organization with a strange name, and I didn't know how to pronounce it that night, so I asked several times. Al-Qaeda, led by a man I'd never heard of, bin Laden. We spent 4 hours that night talking about bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and why they would launch an attack against a US Navy warship in Aden Harbor in Yemen, and why they launched the attacks against the East African embassies in 1998. Didn't understand it. 3 days later, it's about 10:30 in the morning after the attack. We'd all seen it on television or watched it on the internet. The internet was slower those days. You did what you could. I got a phone call from the man who was my board operator that night on WABC. That's the engineer who pulls and pushes buttons, named Civilli. Mike was rattled because he had family in the building, because he had family in the fire companies. He wanted to know who did this. He said, you know. And I realized at that moment that I just crossed a line. And I've been on the other side of that line ever since. I did know. And what I have done for 12 years is tell the story, once upon a time, in America, the unthinkable happened. We were attacked, and we didn't know it was coming. We didn't imagine. Now, the story we all have caught up with. We understand it today. We know the names. We know the places. But I've been on air 12 years telling that story. Not quite 12 years. I figure it's about 138, 39 months. Telling that story continuously. It did happen. It happened to us. It happened to our city. It happened to Washington. And the men who did it, and the men who support the men who did it, are the enemies of the United States and the enemies of Israel. Nothing has changed in 12 years. May 2011. There is a symmetry in life if you look very hard. You've learned from the excellent introduction I had tonight from Ben Brampton. Thank you very much for your generous remarks. Thanks, Scott Feldman, for inviting me tonight. It's a pleasure. You've learned that I am not a Jew. Correct. I am, however, very sympathetic to the struggle of Israel for most of my life, accidentally. I was born into a town outside of Philadelphia where all of my classmates, everybody I went to school with, was Jewish. I didn't know that. You don't know that when you're 6 years old. You don't ask. It's just, David or Michael. That's who they are. But as I became a teenager and as we all became educated about the struggles of Israel in the 1960s, I learned about Israel. I learned about being a Jew in America. From the outside, though. These were my friends. In May of 2011, Malcolm Hoenlein, my very good colleague, invited me and my producer, Lee Mason, to travel with him to Krakow for the annual March of the Living. And we took our radio equipment very boldly into Poland, thinking that we could find a line and connect with my studio in New York and we could broadcast. And for those of you who have been to Auschwitz-Birkenau, you know that it is a stunning experience, unlike anything I've ever seen and will see again. I hope to return someday because now I have a frame. I've thought about it for a while. I didn't when you're plunged into it. I was there that afternoon for the first time, Sunday, May 1st. I saw the geography that is unbelievable to see, and I understood the story for the first time. The next day, we were to go back for the march. That night, I was on air to New York, talking to you people. Sunday, May 1st. About 10:30 at night, launched into my program to talk to the people who had traveled with us. Call came, information came from New York. The information was critical, but we didn't know what it was. My program director contacted my engineers, contacted my studio, contacted us in a boardroom in the Sheraton in Krakow on the beautiful river, very early in the morning. This is about 5 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning, Krakow time, and says, the White House has an announcement. The president's going to speak to the nation. What? At 10:30 on a Sunday night? Why? No explanation. You know the explanation now. We thought at first they wouldn't make an announcement like this if Gaddafi was dead, but it has to be that caliber. This is during the fighting in Libya. About 5 minutes to 11 that night, alert came from the Washington Post, the first time I saw it on the internet, that bin Laden was dead. Why it's significant to me now is that 11 years later of telling this story about bin Laden, there I was with Jews in Krakow, Auschwitz-Birkenau, the march the next day. And I was telling my studio in New York, telling the New York audience, telling the other stations that listen, that bin Laden was dead and justice was done for the people in New York, and now that we all think about it, for the fight that Israel and the Jews have had ever since Auschwitz-Birkenau. Those camps were the crisis and remain the crisis. That's what I saw that night. And I told my audience that. I wasn't as careful as I'd wanted to be because it was happening very fast. The White House is going to make an announcement. Here's the news. Here's what we learned. Strange town called Abbottabad, a special forces raid. Why is Abbottabad on the map? Why is the Pakistan Military Academy there? Information was coming in from all places. But now that I've had a chance to reflect upon it, and now that I have the right audience, I can say that bin Laden's poison, what made that man a mass murderer, started with the men who built those camps. Bin Laden was educated at the knee of men who were in league with those monsters. Al-Husseini, you know names. Khattab, you know names. You know where they came from. You know who Al-Husseini is. You know there are photographs with him with the dictator. There are photographs with him in 1943 with Himmler. That poison, Al-Husseini, that poison back to Cairo, that poison in the minds of the Palestinian children who grew up to kill Jews in Israel, that's the poison that bin Laden carried with him when he went into Afghanistan. That's the poison that bin Laden filled the minds with the Egyptian and Yemeni young men who attacked this city. That poison. And I'd like to say that in 1945, the heroes arrived, and it ended. I'd like to say that the birth of Israel, 1948, the heroes arrived, and it ended. I'd like to say that in the time that I grew up, the Six-Day War, or the Yom Kippur War, or the October attack, all of that, I'd like to say it ended. But we know it has not ended. We know that the poison is in the world of the young men in the Ummah. We know that poison is not natural to the Arab world. We know that poison is encouraged by men who have decided to be evil and wicked. One of them was the dictator in Berlin. Another of them was Himmler in Berlin. They're dead, but that poison lives on. So that night, we buried bin Laden. However, here we are, the spring coming of the next year, and the fight continues. And now I come to the part that's important to emphasize. Not just my radio show, but the story that I tell each night, the story that Malcolm and I tell every Thursday night. My understanding of where we are right now is that the relationship between the State of Israel and the Jews of America has never been stronger. Never been stronger. I understand why. I do. Israel is a vibrant and growing and extremely happy place. I understand why it works. I understand being a Jew in America, you have this thing to learn about. I understand not all the Jews in America have been to Israel, and someday they all will, or their children will be there. I've been there many times, a privilege to be there, not as a Jew, but as a person watching a country adapt to the modern world, to the 21st century. At the same time, I've watched the politics of this, and I have to speak it on radio. And you know radio, you make a mistake, you're dead. So every night, I'm very careful, and I speak what I understand to be accurate. And now I'm going to tell you what I know to be accurate, because you're grown-ups, you're men and women, you understand that I'm not here to raise money for my political campaign. I'm not here to make you vote for me. I'm not here to make you feel good about my party. I'm here to tell you what I understand to be, right now, in March of 2011, the threat. Bin Laden's dead, but the threat is imminent. I emphasize the Congress of the United States, Democratic, Republican Congress, Senate, House, old men, young women, older women, younger men. In my conversations over 12 years, the one story that has no division is Israel. Congress. I'm talking about Congress now. 500 and more men and women, all very carefully well-spoken about the alliance between the United States and Israel. So when you read the news and you concern yourself with American politics and Israel and the threat, remember the Congress. Remember the first article of the Constitution is about the legislature. Remember who has the money. Congress. Congress is the important organic institution that stands with Israel. Presidents come and go. Media personalities come and go. Congress is forever. I emphasize that because it's too easy to look past that. Congress, you don't get 500 people on television every day making remarks. But Congress is with us. Congress understands the threat. Congress understands that standing with Israel is standing with democracy, is standing with capitalism, is keeping faith with the American Republic. Now, I did hint there was a dark side, so here we go. Right now. And I'll go fast. I'll do it by capitals. Cairo. The governance there has collapsed into the hands of men who are not friends of America and not friends of Israel. They call themselves the Muslim Brothers. One man, one vote, one time. Sharia. They are not Democrats. There is no transparency. The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, the army, the military dictatorship that's been in control in Cairo for 60 years is in league with the Muslim Brothers. They are not friends of America. They are not friends of Israel. And right now, Israel is doing very good work, trying to maintain good relations with the men in Cairo who want to stay on the side of transparency and trust and security. That's why Israel's working so hard with Egyptian generals. That's why Israel works so hard to maintain good diplomatic relations with a country that has now entered into the fog of this transition to the parliament under the control of the Muslim Brothers and the Salafists, their cousins who are even more extreme. But in this time of threat, the Sinai is a rogue state. Malcolm and I repeat this every Thursday, and I will tell you right now, a rogue state. The Sinai is overrun with gun runners, with drug runners, with narcotics, with money, with gangsters, and it's under the control largely of the men in Tehran. The missiles and the volunteers, in quotes, who have come across the Sinai into Gaza mean Israel mortal threat. That is why you see the action in Gaza. It's fed by the border with the Sinai. Quickly, Damascus, Syria. The Assad regime is in league with Tehran. Tehran is as close to that poison of Berlin in 1945 as you can get. They are committed to chaos. They are committed to anarchy because it is their delusional belief that that will welcome back the 12th Imam, the Mahdi. They believe it. They are not kidding. Their nuclear weapons program, suspect, is a threat to Israel, is a threat to peace on the planet. Tehran controls Damascus. Tehran controls the Islamic Jihad and the Popular Resistance Committees in Gaza. Tehran will push that button to provoke Israel in order to keep the sanctions that are in place and the sanctions that are tightening on Tehran from working. The threat tonight is Tehran. That is the source of the threat. It is not stateless. It is not asymmetrical warfare. It is not something called a terror gang and we don't know their address. We know their address. We know their GPS. We know who they are. They're bad guys. And they're enemies of the United States and they're the enemies of Israel. Israel knows all of this. Jerusalem knows all of this. Bibi Netanyahu, the IDF, know all of this. Now, with just 30 seconds, Mr. Netanyahu's visit to Washington recently. Diplomatic relations right now between Jerusalem and Washington are at a low. I won't compare it to anything else. I'll just say a low. This confirms your suspicions. You're right. But I re-emphasize again, Congress stands with Israel. what you will hear on my show this week, next week, and as we go into what promises to be a very difficult spring, a very difficult summer, a very threatening time, what you will hear again and again is that the Congress of the United States stands with Israel, and the Congress of the United States stands with you, the One Israel Fund. They stand with you tonight. They will stand with you between now and the election. Whether you vote Democratic or Republican, whether you're an American, whether you're a visitor to America, the Congress stands with Israel. So please, do not be gloomy, do not be fatalistic, do not in any way hesitate. Congress stands with Israel. Netanyahu knows it, and now you know it. Thank you very much.